There were only 2 days left before the apocalyptic cold current arrived. Early in the morning, my parents were still nagging non-stop, asking me to transfer the ownership of the house under my name to my younger brother. This time, I readily agreed. Give me 100,000 yuan, and I'll take Su Qingyuan to handle the transfer right now. After getting the money, I immediately took Su Qingyuan to complete the transfer and then rushed straight to my best friend's house who lived alone in the suburbs. On the way, I started spending money like crazy to buy things because in this life, I was going to do my best to survive with the only person who loved me. With a clang sound, I was woken up. I tried hard to open my eyes and felt warm all over, but I remembered that I had clearly been frozen to death outside just now. How come I was now in my own bed? I picked up my mobile phone to check the time, and then I understood. I was reborn 2 days before the apocalyptic cold current came. After getting up, I saw my parents quarreling noisily in the living room. Mom was shouting at Dad with saliva flying everywhere. Su Jiangwo, you're just a useless wimp. You can't even get a house for our son. They were still the same as in my previous life, wholeheartedly thinking that my house should be given to my younger brother, Su Qingyuan. In my previous life, I didn't agree, and they stayed at my house and wouldn't leave. When the apocalyptic cold current came, they snatched all my heating items, forced me to go out to grab supplies, and I was frozen to death alive. Seeing me appear, Dad said, Wan, why don't you just give this house to your brother? In the future, before he could finish his words, I interrupted him. Give me 100,000 yuan right now, and I'll transfer the ownership of the house to him immediately. I'll move out, and we'll be strangers from now on. Although I had bought this house by working day and night for 10 years and saving money from part-time jobs, compared to survival, that money didn't matter. My words stunned my quarreling parents and my younger brother who was playing games. Then Mom quickly transferred the money to me, afraid that I would go back on my word. I dragged Su Qingyuan and rushed to the real estate trading center and completed the transfer in a few minutes. After coming out, I told Su Qingyuan, just a friendly reminder. It's recommended that you prepare more heating items. However, Su Qingyuan gave me a look. Idiot, that house has underfloor heating, and besides, it's summer now. It's hard to persuade those who are doomed. I'd better leave first. I took a taxi and rushed straight to my best friend's house. On the way, I took out my mobile phone and placed orders like crazy, from warm clothes to heating equipment. I even bought 2 small wind generators, which cost me tens of thousands of yuan. I took out my mobile phone and sent a message to my best friend, Anan, I'll arrive at your house in an hour. I've bought a lot of things, and people will deliver them one after another. Remember to sign for them. Anan's parents died in an accident 2 years ago, leaving her a 2-story villa in the suburbs. She's a web writer, and the quiet environment is just good for her writing. The only inconvenience was that she lived a bit far from me. 2 minutes after I sent the message, she called me back. Wan, what's going on? I didn't have time to explain much, and I was also afraid that the taxi driver would be suspicious. I'm just going to stay at your place for a while. I'll send you the details in a message. After saying that, I hung up the phone and continued sending messages. Go and buy some rice, flour, and oil now. The more, the better. If you can't carry them, ask the boss to deliver them. My best friend replied, you're acting as if we're fleeing from famine. I just bought some 2 days ago. The 2 of us can't eat that much. I only replied with 6 words. Listen to me. It's about survival. At the agricultural product store at the entrance of the alley where Anan lived, I asked the taxi driver to stop and wait for me. I went in and bought a lot of vegetable seeds, flower pots, plastic sheets, as well as spades and hammers. The taxi driver looked puzzled. Girl, are you going to grow vegetables? I smiled. I'm just idle and want to do this to kill time. I didn't explain too much. I didn't want to be regarded as a crazy person by others. In the apocalypse, the most terrifying thing is not natural disasters, but human hearts. In my previous life, I witnessed with my own eyes that people could fight to the death for a bunch of green vegetables. They could also turn their backs on their relatives for a hot water bag. After moving the things out of the car, the originally sunny day suddenly became gloomy. I looked at my watch. There were less than 30 hours left before the blizzard, and then looked at the agricultural products all over the ground and asked me suspiciously, "Are you planning to make a survival vlog while moving things inside?" I said, "The apocalypse is coming, we have to survive." In the house, we ate lunch voraciously. I explained to her about my rebirth. Although she was doubtful, she still believed me. In the afternoon, the two of us started to act separately. She continued to buy food and medicine. I hired workers to build a huge color steel house. I knocked down the wall on the first floor of Anand's house and connected the door with the color steel house. I also asked the workers to raise the height of the surrounding wall and install anti-climbing nets. The workers joked, "Girl, what are you two preparing for?" I joked back, "We two girls live together and don't feel safe, in case we encounter burglars. It'll be a disaster." When everything was ready, it was already dark. The next day, I asked Anand to wait at home for the deliveries. I took all my savings and went to purchase the most important supplies, coal. When 20 tons of coal were stuffed into the color steel house, I felt much more at ease. Although Anand's house was heated by natural gas, all the water pipes would surely burst when the time came. We could only use the most primitive way of burning coal to keep warm. Looking at the mountain of supplies, I hoped that this time I could take Anand and survive until the disaster ended. I took out my mobile phone and saw that my younger brother had posted on Moments, with a picture of 8 dishes. I took a look and guessed that most of them were from my refrigerator. Moving into a new house, so happy with my family, I left a comment immediately. "There are still steaks and meat that I bought in the freezer. Don't touch them, I'll come to take them away tomorrow." Based on the personalities of my younger brother and my mother, they would finish eating all that meat even if they stuffed themselves tonight and would never leave any for me. But wasn't that exactly what I wanted? I wondered if they would still be happy after tomorrow, before going to bed at night. I fully charged all the warm patches and power banks. I also took out 5 thermos buckets that I had prepared and filled them with hot water. After finishing all these, I took a hot bath and was ready to go to bed. If I remembered correctly, it would be a blizzard day starting from tomorrow. At this time, Mom made a WeChat video call to me, "Buy some meat and send it to us tomorrow. There's so little meat in your house, who's it enough for?" I sneered, "If you want to eat, buy it yourself. I don't have time." After saying that, I hung up directly. In my previous life, I thought that since we were family, there was no need to care too much, but they became even more excessive. They forcibly moved into my house, occupied my room, and I could only sleep on the floor every day. Besides working, I had to do housework, while they just sat around like parasites at home. Finally, when the apocalyptic cold current came, they drove me out of the house and let me freeze to death on the street. Thinking of this, my fingernails had dug into my flesh, and my hatred was spreading endlessly. Anand probably heard the sound of my video call. She came out of the bedroom and hugged me. "Wan, since God has given you a chance to be reborn, let's cherish it and try our best to survive." I nodded vigorously and blocked the contact information of all 3 of them. When going to bed, I whispered to Anand, "From now on, you're my only family." Sure enough, at 8 o'clock the next morning, it was still dark, and Moments was full of people expressing their curiosity, but I knew that the blizzard was coming. At 9 o'clock, it got a little brighter, and then heavy snow started falling from the sky. I picked up the thermometer and measured it. It was -10 degrees Celsius. After Anand turned on the TV, the news reported, "Dear citizens, due to this sudden change in the weather, emergency heating will be provided before 18:00 today. Please get ready for the cold." Then no place in the whole country was spared. Even High Bay, which was summer all year round, had snowfall. Taking advantage of the fact that the snow wasn't too thick yet, I took Anand to start clearing the snow at the door. Otherwise, the thicker it got, the harder it would be to clear. Sooner or later, we would be trapped in the house and couldn't get out. In the evening, the snow outside had accumulated to more than 20 centimeters, and there was still no sign of it stopping. Anand and I were eating hot pot while enjoying the heating. It was so comfortable. Anand handed me a piece of boiled tripe. "Fortunately, you're here, otherwise, I would surely have been frozen to death alone. By the way, what happened to me in the previous life?" I smiled. "Let's not talk about the previous life. Anyway, now we have each other, and we should work hard to survive together." when it came to an in the previous life, I actually felt very guilty. Because when I was driven out by my parents to grab supplies, I asked her for help. She didn't hesitate to drive a car without anti-skid tires to pick me up, but the car overturned, and she was seriously injured and trapped. She died before me. Before she died, we had a video call. I remembered that her eyes were full of tears, and she cried and said, "Juan, I'm so useless, I can't save you, in this life. I'm going to save her." Thinking of this, my phone suddenly rang. It was a strange number. I regretted answering it as soon as I picked it up. "Sue Juan, you little bitch, I told you to bring food today, but you dare not come. Do you want to starve us to death?" I didn't say a word, hung up, blocked the number, and then turned off my phone. I could imagine how furious Mom was, spitting saliva at the other end of the phone. I felt so good that I ate 2 mouthfuls of beef rolls deliciously, actually, with the food I had stocked up at home. If they had planned well, they could have survived for 3 to 5 days at least, but they were afraid that I would come back, so they finished it all in one day. They brought this upon themselves. For the next 3 days in a row, there was a blizzard every day. The work for Anin and me during the day was to constantly clear the snow in the yard to the outside. The temperature dropped from -10 degrees Celsius on the first day to -40 degrees Celsius, and the whole country fell into a panic in the cold winter. The roar of the snow-clearing vehicles rang through every corner of the city non-stop for 24 hours, and the maintenance hotline of the heating company was flooded with calls. People started to rush to supermarkets to grab supplies regardless of everything. As long as there was something on the shelves, they would grab it whether it could be used or not. Stampede incidents happened frequently. Official support also arrived, and helicopters would airdrop supplies in various communities every day. I saw the property manager in the property group at me. "Miss Sue, we're going to distribute a batch of cold-proof supplies to everyone, but we haven't seen you recently. Are you at home?" I quickly replied, "I'm on a business trip and won't be at home recently. Please give my share of supplies to others." After that, I received praise from my neighbors, and some even sent me red envelopes. However, at this time, the alarm of the wall-mounted boiler rang, and the heating stopped, fortunately. The room temperature could still last for a few hours. In the evening, I used the induction cooker to stew a pot of spare ribs. Anin and I were wearing coral fleece pajamas, sitting around the induction cooker in the warm steam, and didn't feel cold at all. Before going to bed, I laid out and turned on the electric blanket in advance and spread out the quilt so that the quilt would be warm when we went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the phone ringing. In a daze, I subconsciously pressed the answer button. "Sue Juan, you slut, you didn't let the property give us supplies. You're damned." Su Qingyuan was roaring crazily at the other end of the phone. I sneered, "If you had stayed in our hometown honestly and hadn't coveted my house, you wouldn't be suffering like this now. You deserve it." After saying that, Su Qingyuan's voice suddenly became a bit gloomy. "Sue Juan, if we survive this time, don't expect to have a minute of peace in your life." I wrapped the quilt around Anin more tightly and retorted, "I've had a rabies vaccine. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" After saying that, without waiting for him to rant, I hung up the phone and blocked him. I wondered how many numbers he had to call me. The next morning, after getting up, I quickly put on thermal underwear, a sweater, and a down jacket before I felt not too cold. I covered Anin, who was still sleeping soundly, with my quilt, took out my mobile phone, and checked the weather forecast. The temperature had dropped again overnight. The outdoor temperature was already -54 degrees Celsius now. Most of the news were that the authorities were actively launching emergency plans. But due to the non-stop work of the snow-clearing vehicles, many drivers fainted from exhaustion and got frostbite, and the snow-clearing speed decreased. Seeing this, I looked out of the window. The snow didn't seem to be that heavy anymore, but the snow accumulation was still thick. I put a few warm patches in the inner pocket of my clothes and went out to clear the snow. The snow had reached my thighs, but fortunately, it wasn't heavy. Half an hour later, I felt that I was almost frozen stiff, and my eyelashes were frosted. I threw down the tools and returned to the house. At this time, Anin had already woken up. "Juan, why didn't you wake me up to do it with you? Hurry up and drink some hot water." After saying that, she handed me a cup of hot water. I drank a few sips slowly and finally felt a bit more comfortable, seeing that you were still sleeping and I'm used to getting up early. So I went to sweep the snow first. What should we have for breakfast? Let's make some vegetable soup and cook some noodles. In this extremely cold weather, meat could be preserved for a long time, but fresh vegetables couldn't last long. However, since we had prepared vegetable seeds, we could also start trying to grow vegetables in flower pots indoors. I'll go and make it. You quickly get into the quilt and warm up. I haven't turned off the electric blanket yet. I quickly got into the quilt. Listening to the sounds from the kitchen, I felt very warm in my heart. In my previous life, my biological family occupied all the warm supplies and forced me to go out to find food. On the contrary, this sister without blood relations was the one who cared about me. Thinking of this, I took out my mobile phone and looked at the property group. This look made me laugh because of Su Qingyuan. I don't know how Su Qingyuan got into the group, and he even started acting like an online beggar. It's hilarious. Which kind-hearted neighbor can share some unused quilts and thick clothes? We just bought this house and didn't have time to prepare before encountering this natural disaster. After the disaster is over, our family will be grateful with enthusiasm. An hour after the message was sent out, no one paid any attention to him at all. In this kind of disaster, others couldn't even get supplies even if they offered tens of thousands of yuan for them. But he still wanted to get something for free. He really had a brain like a rectum that could hold anything. Thinking of this, I added him back to my friend list, and he quickly accepted my request. Don't say I didn't help you. The temperature is still okay now. You can put on all the clothes at home and then wrap yourself in a quilt and rush downstairs to the supermarket to get something. After sending this message, I sent another message to the owner of the supermarket downstairs. Brother, you have to keep an eye on your store in this horrible weather, lest someone with ulterior motives steal things, but there's no need to think about it. He would definitely do as I said. I just hope that the owner of the supermarket downstairs won't be too hard on him. Oh, actually, he should show no mercy. After sending these two messages, I started browsing the news. In quite a few places, power outages had already started due to high-voltage line failures caused by blizzards and low temperatures. I didn't know when our electricity would be cut off. Thinking of this, I got up again and started fiddling with the small household wind generator. Fortunately, since I was a child, I had been treated like a workhorse at home, so assembling and installing all kinds of things wasn't difficult for me. By the time Anan finished cooking, I had already fixed the generator. There was some minced meat added to the vegetable soup, paired with chewy noodles. We were so absorbed in eating that we didn't say a word. Anan, your cooking skills are really excellent. In the afternoon, I'll continue to clear the snow, and you can study how to grow vegetables. Although we still have some vegetables left, there aren't many. After taking a break, I got fully equipped again and started clearing the snow. I found that although the snow hadn't stopped, it had become much lighter. However, a cold wind came again, blowing on my face like knives, and it hurt a lot. Less than half an hour later, I had given up clearing the snow and returned to the house. My mobile phone had been frozen and turned off. When I went to boil ginger soup, I put my mobile phone under the quilt to warm it up. When I turned it on again, I saw that Su Qingyuan had sent me a bunch of voice messages like crazy. After clicking on them, I couldn't help laughing. Su Wanwan. You bitch, you made me fail to get anything and even got me beaten up. Just wait for me. I didn't want to listen to the other messages anymore. At this time, the owner of the supermarket downstairs sent me a message. Little girl, I have to thank you for the reminder. Just now, a brat sneaked in and wanted to rob things. Fortunately, you reminded me before, and I had some handy tools beside me. At this time, suddenly the power went out, the air conditioner stopped, and the room was plunged into darkness. Soon, the room temperature began to drop, and Anne came out of the tidied-up cultivation room, looking panicked, and her voice was trembling when she spoke. Wan, the power's out. What should we do? I first took out the rechargeable lighting lamps that I had prepared before and turned on 2 of them to light up the whole room, and then comforted her. Don't be afraid. We have a generator. I'll go and connect it now. After a while, the air conditioner started working again, but actually, I still didn't feel very at ease in my heart. I didn't know how long this wind generator could last. In the evening, I took out the crayfish that I had bought and made 2 flavors, spicy and garlic. It was quite comfortable to eat something spicy in this weather. Before eating, I first took my mobile phone to take pictures, and then looked puzzled. Wan, if you post it on Moments now, aren't you asking for trouble? What if people see it and come to rob us? I smiled. This isn't for Moments, it's for a scoundrel. After saying that, I sent the pictures to Su Qingyuan. Sure enough, he replied quickly, Su Wan, I order you to bring these crayfish to me and my parents right now, then I might consider leaving a room for you in the future. I really couldn't help but sneer. I don't know whether to say he's too bold or has an empty head. He's still acting so arrogantly at this time. I think you don't just not treat yourself as an outsider, you don't even regard yourself as a human being. After replying quickly, I ignored him and happily ate the crayfish within it. However, before we finished eating, suddenly there was a loud noise at the entrance of the yard, and I put down the crayfish in our hands. I signaled Anin to stay in the house. I took a big gulp of white wine to boost my courage and then went out with a hammer to check the situation. The cold wind made me shiver, but I couldn't care about the cold anymore because the gate had been crashed open by a taxi. The taxi driver who had sent me here a few days ago got out of the car wrapped in a cotton-padded coat and looked at me fiercely. Little girl, I know you have food here, share some with me. I really have no other way. I have old people and children to support. I hesitated. If I gave him some, what would Anin and I do, if I didn't give him any? I wasn't sure if I could handle him with his physique. He saw my hesitation and continued, don't worry, I don't want much, just give me half, or else I'll have to take it myself, or I'll immediately call the people around here to come together. Half. How could he have the nerve to say that it wasn't much? But I didn't dare to confront him directly. Brother, I can share some food with you, wait for me to go inside and get it, but you have to promise not to leak the news. After saying that, I quickly rushed into the house, locked the door, and then Anin and I moved the dining table to block the door. At this time, the driver outside the door should have realized that I was lying to him and started smashing the door crazily. I'm telling you, don't be ungrateful. This door was specially replaced and reinforced and thickened by Anin after her parents passed away. No matter how hard he smashed it, there was no movement. After smashing it for a few minutes, it suddenly became quiet. I thought that probably because of the cold weather, he couldn't bear it and left, but it turned out that I was overthinking. Suddenly, there were more people outside the door. Through the peephole, I saw at least 4 or 5 people. Anin took a look and her voice was trembling. Why is Brother Wang next door also? I used to always help him tutor his children with their homework. How could he treat me like this? I patted Anin on the shoulder. This is the apocalypse. People's hearts are unpredictable. Everyone will go crazy to survive. The sound of smashing the door continued one after another, which was especially harsh in this dark night. With a bang, the glass was smashed. I thought it was bad and rushed to the window with a hammer. The driver had already climbed onto the window and was about to get in. His lips, which were purple from the cold, looked extremely eerie at this moment. I wanted to hit him with the hammer, but at this angle, if I hit him, it would be his head. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Taking advantage of my moment of hesitation, he had already pounced on me, and then let out a scream, and then I heard a cracked sound. The driver was lying on the ground hugging his leg and howling. I turned my head and saw Anin standing there blankly with a baseball bat in her hand, trembling uncontrollably. I never thought that she, who had always been timid and cowardly, was braver than me at this moment. However, at this time, someone outside the window started to climb in again. This time, I decided not to be soft-hearted anymore. I took the hammer and swung it at the people climbing through the window. To avoid my hammer, those 2 people had to retreat. Anin held the baseball bat and looked at the driver lying on the ground. I quickly returned to the kitchen, filled half a basin with water, and then returned to the window and splashed the water outside. The water fell on them and instantly froze. I shouted at them like crazy, come on, come here, if you dare to climb in again, you'll meet my hammer. As I said that, I also swung the hammer in my hand vigorously. Although my arm was already sore, those people looked at each other, then scrambled and fled. Probably in this weather, after this commotion, even if they didn't freeze to death, they would get frostbite. They wouldn't come back in a short time. However, how to deal with the driver became a problem. I tied his hands and feet with a rope and checked the injury on his leg. The bone should be okay, but it was just swollen badly, and it meant to just keep him locked up like this. But I thought keeping him here was like a time bomb. But if we threw him out, he would surely be frozen to death. While I was extremely conflicted in my heart, the driver spoke. "Two girls, please let me live. If this damn natural disaster passes, I'll repay your kindness by working like a slave for you." In the end, we decided to let him go. Maybe it was because I couldn't be cruel, or maybe it was because I saw the photo of the smiling little boy in his car that day. I sprayed some Yunnan Baiyao on his leg, gave him a bag of rice, a bag of flour, and a barrel of oil. He limped and drove his car with modified anti-skid tires away, and I used 10 layers of plastic sheets to seal the window again. Although it wasn't as good as glass, at least it wouldn't leak too much wind. In the following days, the snow became heavy again, and I really couldn't clear it anymore, so we had to give up, until the low temperature lasted for 15 days. Our wind generator broke down, although there was no air conditioner. An self-built house used to burn charcoal in the early years. Later, when the natural gas was installed, the stove was removed. Fortunately, the stove had been left in the storeroom all the time, and I moved it out, connected the flue, and then tried to make a fire. When we were both choked and coughed until our eyes were full of tears, we finally succeeded. Although the water pipes of the underfloor heating were frozen, the stove was burning red. Sitting around the stove, we didn't feel too cold. Unfortunately, the vegetables we planted still couldn't survive due to the low temperature. Now our food was only meat and instant food. When we went to bed at night, we huddled under one quilt, which was stuffed with hot water bottles and warm patches. We also had warm palace patches stuck on our bodies. During this period, Su Qingyuan would go crazy on WeChat every day, from threatening me to begging me bitterly, but I didn't reply to him at all. It's really ridiculous. In this situation, he still wanted me to send supplies to them. I'm afraid that if I did, it would cost me my life. On the 21st day of the low temperature, the snow stopped, but the temperature was still terribly low, and among the power banks we had prepared, only 10 were still usable. The others had been used up for charging the warm patches every day, so we decided that we wouldn't use warm patches when we went to bed at night. We must keep our mobile phones powered on and wait for the news of rescue. However, the situation reported in the news was very serious. Appeal to the general public to stay at home patiently and wait for the delivery of supplies. Do not go out on your own to avoid losses of life and property. After clicking on it, I found that many people really couldn't bear it anymore and drove out to look for supplies regardless of everything. However, most people didn't have the ability to modify their tires to be anti-skid, so they didn't bring back any supplies, but instead, many people died in accidents. For a while, people were in a state of panic. On this day, when Inen and I were grilling meat on the stove, Su Qingyuan went crazy again, and my mobile phone kept vibrating. In order to eat the barbecue quietly, I had to answer his video call. "Sister, please help me and Mom. Dad has been frozen to death." For a moment, I was a bit surprised. That man who had never had a say at home was dead. And this was probably the first time he had called me sister in more than 20 years. Before I could react, Su Qingyuan suddenly knelt down in front of the video. "Sister, I'm begging you, we were wrong before. Please be kind and save us this time. I don't want the house anymore. I'll give it back to you." I felt a bit of pity, but when I thought about how in my previous life, when I begged them not to push me out, what I got was Su Qingyuan's sneer. I looked at Su Qingyuan, who was crying bitterly, and was no longer moved. I remember there's a box at the bottom of the storeroom with the barbecue charcoal that I bought before. You can use it to keep warm. As for food, figure it out by yourself. After saying that, I hung up the video and turned off my phone directly. I didn't want to waste any more electricity on my phone for them. I poked at the meat on the stove, and then looked at me, hesitated for a long time, and finally opened her mouth. "Wan. They treated you so badly before, why did you still?" I picked up a piece of sizzling meat and stuffed it into my mouth. then smiled. "Have you ever heard that carbon monoxide poisoning can kill people?" Anne opened her mouth wide after hearing this and looked at me in disbelief. "Indeed, burning charcoal can keep warm, but in high-rise buildings in this weather, the windows and doors must be closed tightly. The charcoal fire doesn't burn fully, and there's no chimney outlet." What awaited them was naturally death. I took a sip of white wine. The spicy flavor went down my throat and was so stimulating that it brought tears to my eyes. And then, all of this can only be said to be karma. Having you by my side is enough for me. The next morning, I drank ginger soup and turned on my phone to read the news. But out of habit, I still clicked on the unread messages on WeChat. It was a message sent by Su Qingyuan at around 4 o'clock in the morning. "Su Wanwan, you're so cruel." There were no other messages after that. I thought that probably his mother and he had followed in Su Jiangwo's footsteps and died. I didn't feel sad at all. Instead, I felt refreshed. I even ate 2 more meat buns for breakfast. The news was as gloomy as always. The authorities were always advocating that everyone should not go out and wait patiently for rescue. They also reminded people not to burn things casually at home to keep warm because more and more people were dying from fires and carbon monoxide poisoning. When the low temperature lasted until the 40th day, and I didn't have much food left. Fortunately, we had enough coal and didn't lack water. We started to have only 1 meal a day, either noodle soup or rice porridge with a little minced meat in it, although eating the same thing repeatedly could be boring. It was still better than those people who starved to death or froze to death at home. On the 48th day, the weather forecast said that the snow had stopped, but the temperature didn't rise. Instead, it became even lower. We tried to open the door to go out and check the situation, but the snow had already blocked the door and windows tightly. Fortunately, I had bought dozens of rechargeable lighting lamps at that time. So Anne and I wouldn't have to live in the dark without electricity or light sources. On the 53rd day, the thing I was most afraid of happened. Anne fell ill. She started to have a fever repeatedly. When the fever was at its highest, it reached 40 degrees Celsius. Her whole body was as red and hot as if she had been boiled, but she kept saying that she was cold with her mouth trembling. The fever medicine could bring down the temperature, but it would flare up again a few hours later. I was completely panicked. When the fever continued until the next day, she was sometimes conscious and sometimes in a coma. Even when she was conscious, she couldn't speak. She held my hand tightly and then showed a pale smile. I understood that she was encouraging me to survive, but I couldn't stop my tears from flowing. I no longer saved electricity on my phone. I set the alarm clock and fed her medicine every 6 hours. During this period, I kept wiping the palms and soles of her feet with alcohol. At night, I covered us with all the quilts and then took off my clothes to warm her with my body temperature. After 3 days like this, finally her body temperature stayed at 38 degrees Celsius, and she could stay conscious all the time. It's just that the inflammation in her throat hadn't gone away yet, so it was still difficult for her to speak. "Wanwan, you take more rest." "I'm much better," hearing her words. I finally felt relieved. To help her recover as soon as possible, our diet went back to 3 meals a day. However, all 3 meals were porridge with more soup and less rice. I took out the vegetable packets left from instant noodles before and put them in her porridge, hoping to supplement her with some vitamins, even if it was minimal. It was the only way at present. On the 58th day, she no longer had a fever, but her body was still weak and she could only lie quietly in bed to rest. On this day, I finally saw a glimmer of hope in the news. The authorities had built a shelter more than 50 kilometers away from us. The problem was that the traffic was blocked, there were limited personnel, and we lived in a rather remote place, so we had to go there by ourselves. Although it was very difficult, it was better than having no hope at all, so I made an important decision to set off for the shelter with Anne. But the first problem to be solved was how to get out of the house blocked by heavy snow. After thinking for a long time, I decided to make an exit from the window. I put 3 hot water bottles in my down jacket, put on earmuffs and down gloves, and then tore open the plastic sheet on the window. In an instant, the snow outside poured in. I stood on the windowsill and shoveled the snow into the house because it was too thick outside and I couldn't shovel it. I could only clear a little exit first. After 20 minutes of hard work, I finally cleared an exit. After climbing out along the exit and landing on the ground, the snow in the deepest place had reached my waist. I was like a carrot planted in the snow, slowly clearing the snow around me. It took me 2 full hours to clear a path from the window to the door, which was only 5 or 6 meters away. At this time, I had no strength left and was almost frozen stiff. After returning to the house from the window, I sealed the window with plastic sheets again and started to boil porridge and have a meal. I planned to continue clearing the snow after regaining my strength. At least I needed to clear a path from the door to the outside, and then looked at me apologetically. Wan, I'm so useless, I'm dragging you down at this time. I remembered how this silly girl had been so reckless when she received my call for help in my previous life. I smiled. Anin, you're the most important person to me in this world. Starting in the afternoon, I continued to clear the snow, at my current speed. We could probably set off tomorrow. However, that night, the roar of engines and the noisy voices of people made me panic again. Could it be that someone was coming to rob us again? I got up, took a baseball bat, and stood guard at the door, waiting nervously. Then there was a knock on the door. Sister, are you still there? The voice sounded a bit familiar. Suddenly, I remembered that it was the driver brother. I couldn't help but grip the baseball bat tighter. How could he do this? I should have known that I shouldn't have let him go back then. Since I didn't reply, he continued to knock on the door. Don't worry, I'm here to repay you for saving my life. As you can see, there's a shelter now. I thought that you 2 girls were too far away and couldn't make it there on your own. I deliberately brought a few brothers to pick you up and go there together. If you're still here, just give me a word. I'll wait for you for 10 minutes. After all, several of our cars are waiting to head there. These 2 sentences were like the warm sun in this cold winter apocalypse, making me so excited. After struggling for 5 minutes, I decided to give it a try. I patted the door and asked him with a trembling voice, Brother, are you really here to pick us up? But no one responded to me. I looked through the peephole and saw that there was no one outside. I smiled sadly. It seemed that I was just overthinking, in this situation. Who would waste a few minutes of their chance to survive because of me? Just as I was about to turn around and go back to bed, the door was knocked on again. Sister, if you're in the house, you can look through the peephole. The person beside me is a brother of ours, and he's a policeman. He has an ID. My dead heart was filled with hope again. I looked through the peephole and saw a young man in a police cotton-padded coat standing beside the driver brother, shaking a police ID in his hand. I didn't hesitate anymore and opened the door directly. Tears immediately burst out of my eyes. Brother, I couldn't say anything after that. The police officer carried an in on his back. I put the few remaining compressed dry rations into my bag and followed them out. There were 5 cars parked outside the door. The leading one was a modified Wrangler with a huge snowplow installed in the front. All the tires of the 5 cars were widened and modified into anti-skid tires. And there were iron chains tied between the cars. The police officer explained to me, we have to thank Master Lou and his fellow car enthusiasts for their skills. Otherwise, even if we had cars, we wouldn't be able to move an inch. So the driver brother's surname was Lou. And I got into Brother Lou's car. There was a middle-aged woman sitting in the passenger seat, and a little boy wrapped up tightly was sitting in the back seat. Brother Lou introduced that they were his wife and child. If it hadn't been for the supplies I gave him at that time, I'm afraid their family wouldn't have been able to survive until they got support from others. Listening to Brother Lou's words, I felt a bit guilty. At that time, I thought that he was lying to rob things. I blushed and said to Brother Lou, Brother Lou, I'm really sorry back then. How's your leg? Brother Lou smilingly, what's there to be sorry about? You 2 saved our whole family. It's just a pity that my old mother still didn't make it. Although our convoy had snow-clearing devices and anti-skid tires, it still took us a whole night to cover the distance of more than 50 kilometers. In the shelter, everyone had a smile on their face after surviving the disaster. And I played games with Brother Lou's son in the greenhouse while Brother Lou led his team to continue rescuing people everywhere. This apocalyptic cold winter lasted for a full 3 months. And many people died, but more people survived, thanks to the strength of our country and the efficiency of the rescue teams. Under the sunlight, and I looked at each other and smiled. Today is better than yesterday, this is hope.